Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to be doing another one of our PAC-T tests. That is precision, accuracy, consistency, and terminal performance. And the bullet that we're going to be using is the M193. Now you're probably already familiar with the M193. You see it a lot on the shelves of your favorite gun shop, and it's oftentimes that blasting ammo that you take out to the shooting range. You might be thinking, well, M193 is all M193. What's the big deal? Well, we're going to see if all these different boxes of M193 ammo stack up against that mil-spec standard. And the different ammo that we're going to be using today is number one, Hornady Frontier M193. This one is rated or supposed to be giving us 3,240 feet per second at the muzzle. And by the way, that mil-spec standard calls for 3,165 feet per second at 78 feet from the muzzle. That's roughly 25 meters from the muzzle. And the beauty part of my lab radar chronograph is I will be able to see what that bullet is doing at 25 meters, 25 yards, all those sorts of things. So we're going to be looking very closely at the results of my lab radar chronograph. Now the second bullet that we're going to be using, also American-made M193. This is Winchester. All this is 55 grain stuff, except for the German M193 56 grain men ammo. Taiwan Wolf M193. And then two different boxes of ammo from Israel. This is Israeli IMI M193 and Independence Ammo M193. Now our PAC-T test kind of goes like this. We're going to be shooting, or I'll be shooting 5 rounds from each of those boxes of ammo at a bullseye target. We're going to be looking at precision. That is the size extreme spread of our group. We're going to measure that in MOA. And then we're going to look at accuracy, going to give a bullseye score for each of these different boxes of ammo. And then, as I already alluded to, we're going to be focusing very closely on the consistency part, the results from our chronograph. Then, the one bullet that does the best, comes closest to achieving, or does achieve mil-spec standard, that one round is going to be fired into 20% NATO clear ballistic gelatin at 7 yards. Now you might be wondering, holy smokes, that at 7 yards, why are you doing that? Number one is because that's kind of the test that we always do, but more importantly, a couple of you actually had suggested or asked, how does M193 do for a home defense type of round, personal defense type of round? So that's another reason why we're going to be using or shooting this at 7 yards. I'm all ready. That's the setup. Let's head out to the range and see how all this goes. First set is the Hornady M193s. We should be getting 3,240 feet per second at the muzzle, according to the box. Let's see how it does. .3160. We're clear. This, by the way, is my IWI Tavor rifle, 18-inch barrel. It's a bullpup, so it's kind of, a lot of folks don't think it has such a long barrel. It's an 18-inch barrel, and I'm using my Schmidt & Bender short dot 1.5 to 8 scope today. Don't know how it did up there. Of course, you actually saw it live. Hope it did pretty well. Velocities look pretty decent. We're going to go to the bullseye target in the upper right next, and I'll be shooting the Winchester 55 grain M193s. These are shooting really nice. I think we're getting a little bit more velocity out of these Winchesters. We are clear. Back on safe. Now that lower bullseye, we're going to be shooting the Men ammo. This is German M193, but this is a 56 grain bullet. We are clear. Okay, I've got a fresh set of targets out there, another 3. We're going to start once again at the bullseye target in the upper left. This is the Wolf M193. This is from Taiwan. This I've read or heard that this has a reputation for being rather anemic. Very slow velocity. We're going to see if that's true. Let's give her a try. Okay, well, maybe so. Just barely over 3,000 feet per second on that one. 3,010. And we're clear. All right, 5 shots with the IMI 193, M193. Bullseye in the upper right. We're clear again. Well, this is interesting. It entered here. I'm going to flip this around a little bit so you can see this better. You can see the path. It really tumbled down into here. It took a nosedive. I don't think we're going to be able to extract that bullet. One definitely tumbled. I'll look around and see if I can find the bullet, but I don't think so. Thanks for sticking around to listen to the wrap-up. You know, there is actually an awful lot to talk about these tests that we did today. And I know a lot of you can probably get what you want out of it by watching the range footage and the terminal ballistic footage. But, you know, there's something to actually being involved in shooting this test, being right there, looking at that and handling the bullet inside the gel, looking at it inside the gel, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to try to communicate those sorts of things to you to make it as close as possible to you being there. Sort of a virtual test, right? So let's start off by talking about precision. Precision, that of course was part of our bullseye target test. This was done at 100 yards. And the most precise M193 bullet that we shot today was the IMI from Israel. This one gave us a 1.926 inch group. That's the extreme spread. And of course in MOA, it's still going to be about 1.9 MOA. Nothing fantastic. And I know some folks think that the bullpup rifles are not capable of anything much better than this, but that is not the case. I have shot that Nosler 70 grain AccuBond bullet with a nice little white tip on it. That is consistently sub-MOA in that same Tavor rifle. And some other rounds that I shoot in there, that match burner, the Barnes match burner, shoot really, really well, normally easily between 1 point or below 1.5 MOA. So that rifle, that bullpup Tavor rifle, is certainly capable of a pretty precise and accurate shooting. This 193 ammunition, not terribly known for high accuracy, but this is the best we did. Well, high precision, I should say, about 1.9 MOA. The accuracy test, or really it should have been called the precision test, according to the standard, the mil-spec standard, calls for groups shot at 200 yards with that M16A1 20-inch barrel. And the mean radius, now if you want to learn about what mean radius is, we've got a whole video on that, and the distance to centroid, so you can look up what that is. But a mean radius of 2 inches, not to exceed 2 inches at 200 yards. Now I couldn't find out much more about that. Is that a 5-shot group, 10-shot group, a series of 10-shot groups? I don't know. But that is what I have read in that same spec that I have referenced earlier. But now let's talk about accuracy, true accuracy. And the most accurate load that we fired, the most accurate M193, kudos goes to the Hornady Frontier. A score of 48 points, 50 being the maximum, with 1 striking the actual X. Just barely into it, but it counts. It tore into the X, so it counts as part of that. That is a bullseye accuracy score right there. And that did the best of any of these 6 that we shot. Now let's talk about consistency. Now the consistency really is very important to that M193 standard. And for this we really need to look at the chronograph. Now the velocity standard is set at 78 feet, or rather 23 meters. Now the nice thing about that lab radar chronograph is I can actually view the track of each individual shot that I fired. And when I was out there at the range, I stepped into that part of the menu and I was able to actually watch that and see those rounds. And the only M193 that made standard based on the velocity, which was my major concern, was the Independence ammo. Now this is the Independence bullseye right over here. It did not shoot very precisely. It got a score of 44 with 1 in the X. I ended up putting 1 in the X, but it strung out all over the place. And it was almost a 5-inch extreme spread on this thing, so nothing impressive that way. But it did make that velocity that we really needed, 23.9 feet per second standard deviation, so it fit very well, very nicely into that mil-spec standard. Now what's interesting is another fella posted a very extensive test he did with his chronograph and a bunch of different M193, so kudos out to him for that work. He didn't do terminal ballistic stuff like we're doing here, but he tested an awful lot of factory M193 and XM193 ammo. And he also tested some of those that we tested today. For instance, the Hornady Frontier gave him a, when he fired a 10-shot group, gave him a 3,142 foot per second mean muzzle velocity with a standard deviation of 38 feet per second. Now that was also out of an 18-inch barrel rifle. He also shot Independence ammo, 3,206 feet per second, average muzzle velocity, standard deviation of 37. Now the other 3 M193 ammo that we shot out there, Winchester was fired second. That gave us a 3,147 foot per second average muzzle velocity, but 47.6 feet per second on standard deviation. That fails the standard. Not only was it not fast enough, but it's also too inconsistent. The German 56 grain, so I guess arguably it's not really M193, I don't know. But it's M193 on the box, so we went ahead and tested it. 3,058 feet per second, quite slow, but only 10 feet per second standard deviation, so pretty darn consistent. The Wolf ammo, I noted when we were out at the range that it's known to be anemic, very slow, and indeed, oh boy, that is true. It didn't even break an average of 3,000 feet per second, 2,940 feet per second on average, and 28.4 feet per second on the standard deviation. This one didn't shoot terribly bad, 2-inch extreme spread, and score of 42 with 0 in the X ring. Now let's look at terminal performance. And so that question was, from one of you actually, the question was, is M193 a good choice for home defense, personal defense? And no doubt about it, it will certainly do the job. It's been used by the military for decades, and it has been doing the job. Maybe not at 7 yards so much like we would see in a home defense scenario or like we shot today, but it'll certainly do the job. But it will not shred that enemy that you are ending up shooting. So let's be real straightforward about that. You saw what it did to that gel block, and the gel block is designed to simulate soft tissue in a human or in a mammal, let's just say. And it did not shred that gel block. So you know, I've heard about this sort of stuff, but M193, there isn't any centerfire rifle going to do that. Anyway, let's get right back on track. We got very interesting results. Pretty much penetrated the entire 16-inch gel block, exited down the bottom as it was tumbling, actually hit relatively high, exited out the bottom, and lucky that when I watched that footage, when I got home, I saw that that bullet ejected, hit or struck that wood platform, and the second block, my backer block, ended up coming down on top of it. So then I went back out and grabbed my backer block that I had just put away because nothing penetrated into it, grabbed that backer block, flipped it upside down, and sure enough, there's that M193 bullet stuck right there, and I just pulled it off. That's it. It lost an awful lot of weight, though. That M193 Independence Ammo 55 grain bullet to start, or I'm assuming it was perfectly 55 grains, ended up at 42.7 grains. That is a weight retention of 77.6%. And this bullet clearly tumbled. We could see it tumble. And that's that path whenever it does this sort of thing in the gel block, we know it's tumbling. And in fact, if we could look at this in a true three-dimensional sense, that bullet entered the gel block, let's say here, and then it just didn't nosedive this way. It actually turned toward you, let's say toward the left, and dropped at the same time. So it really took a nice little travel through that gel block. It tumbled, which it's not supposed to do. Officially, the M193 is not supposed to tumble. It is supposed to fragment, and it fragmented. That's how it lost that weight. It's supposed to reliably fragment out to that distance or range where the velocity starts to drop below 2,700 feet per second. Well, from 7 yards, we certainly were above 3,100 something feet per second, so it should have reliably fragmented. It's not supposed to tumble, but indeed it is, or it did. Now here's the interesting thing. My son did a similar test to this about a year ago, actually a number of months ago. He was shooting his AR-15 5.56 into one of my gel blocks, and he was using Vimple Golden Tiger 5.56 55 grain bullet, not listed as an M193, but still a very similar projectile. And he saw very similar results as well. His test was shot at 79 degrees Fahrenheit ambient air temperatures. Depth of penetration before it ejected was 12.75 inches. The weight of the bullet was 44.4 grains, and it did tumble and it did fragment, obviously. Now, before we end, I wanted to point out that, normally when I do my PAC-T tests, I look at a very specific bullet. Looked at the Spear Gold Dot, looked at Sierra bullets, Sierra tipped Match Kings. I've looked at Sierra Game Kings. We've looked at Barnes tipped triple shock bullets. You get the idea. Very specific bullets. But in reality, M193 isn't such a specific bullet as it is a specification for a relatively generalized bullet. That bullet then is a 55 grain full metal jacket bullet. And the only other specification for that bullet is that it has to have a cannelure. So I look closely at the M193 Independence Ammo, and indeed it does have a cannelure. That's obvious when we look closely at that cartridge. Final thoughts on the M193. Home defense, personal defense. Certainly the 5.56 is a good choice for that. M193 will do the job, but there's better things out there, of course, in that same caliber. Great example of that is the 62 grain Barnes tipped triple shock. We did a test on that. That is a very impressive 5.56 bullet. There are other bullets that will also perform very, very well. In fact, we have another PAC-T test coming up with the Lehigh controlled chaos bullet. I'm excited to try that one, and I hope you'll tune in for that as well. Thanks for watching.